Representative Lindbergh.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. You know, I live in the Upper Peninsula where we don't have a ban on baiting and where you can recreationally feed deer. I do feed the birds. And yeah, I mean, it brings a great deal of enjoyment. And I have a game cam. I'm not a streaming live game cam, but in the process of feeding the birds, I've had, and I live in a fairly residential area, but I've had a bear on my bird feeder. I've had deer occasionally in my bird feeder. I have raccoons in my bird feeder. When the bear comes, I pull the bird feeders up till the bear goes away because I realize that, you know, we're not only is he doing damage to my bird feeder, but I'm putting his life at risk. But the deer are there fairly often, you know, and they like the sunflower seeds, and it's in a feeder that they have to kind of almost stand on their hind legs to get into, so are you suggesting that we ban bird feeding in these areas? Is because that's, as I look at this game camp thing here, that's essentially what these folks are doing. They're feeding the birds.
No. But maybe, Representative, it would be helpful. Dean, do you want to talk maybe a little bit about how our officers would respond to a situation like that you've described, and that might help kind of talk about the perspective that the department brings to that and how we try and work with folks. Dean, you want to maybe address that issue?
Sure. Thank you. The department and the law enforcement division, we're not out to try to stop bird feeding. If that be the case, I'd have a hard time living at home because my wife absolutely loves to feed birds, and so do I. But when we encounter a situation when people are incidentally having deer come in and we get a complaint on it, we will go out and we will attempt to talk to the folks, give them some ideas about what they can do to maybe minimize the fact of deer coming in. You know, our job is to work with the public also, and we're not trying to ban this. Now, there are different methods that you can use. Methods you can put your bird feeders at different locations. You can put fencing around them if you've got a chronic problem. I live on the edge of a swamp. I have a lot of deer that come in, and I have to be able to take some measures myself to be able to make sure the deer doesn't get into our feeders. People want to feed turkeys. There are many organizations around the state, the National Wild Turkey Federation, the Michigan Turkey Hunters Association, that have different plans in that they can give to people to make bird feeders, or turkey feeders. So there are different methods to be able to feed animals and keep the deer, you know, to a minimum coming into them. You know, it's been brought up before. I heard a couple times about apple trees. Well, that's a natural process. So are acorns under oak trees. So I mean, that has nothing to do with the incidental feeding of deer because of somebody's placing something out, you know, as the sunflower seeds, as an example. So we use education to be able to try to educate folks as different methods they can use to minimize the fact that the deer are coming into their feeders. And, you know, we really need to focus on the fact of what's our goal here, and that is to, especially up in the TB areas, we want to keep minimizing the deer contact, the congregating of deer, so that that disease doesn't spread. It's been a ban, I think, 10, 12 years now up in the TB area, and that's a huge tourism boom for that area. I grew up in Grayling. I know what tourism is and what it is to communities. You know, we need to protect our deer herd. We'll work with our folks that are having the backyard bird feeder, but as this bill is, the incidental feeding, if we have language like that, and if I have an officer that actually goes in and there is feeding going on, you know, of deer congregating, they say, "Oh, I'm not feeding deer." You know, that's going to make our ability to take the court to the ones that are actually having excess amounts of deer coming into their areas. You know, when it gets down to an enforcement issue, that's going to severely restrict our ability to be able to take these cases to the court to get this stopped.
May I have a follow-up?
Sure, go ahead.
Again, this is just an anecdotal observation, but like I said, I live in a fairly residential area. Although there's but we have towny deer. That's what we, you know, and and they not only do they eat my bird feed, they eat my wife's hostas, and they chew on my apple trees, but I'm willing to tolerate that. But I mean, these deer, they congregate because they're forced to congregate because they're not living in a and I'm not sure if this is the case in here, but the area that they live in, I see more deer in my yard than I ever see when I go deer hunting. I mean, that's just a fact, because they have a limited area in which they can hang out in, and they've learned to live on people's plants and on bird feeders, and probably, you know, there are some people in our area. It's not against the law to feed them a limited amount. I believe not a limited amount of food just for viewing purposes, but.
Representative, I've heard that your deer blind is your bedroom window. So.
Mr. Chair, I know I'm supposed to direct my comments to you, and I have one, but I think I'm gonna let it pass for right now.
We'll speak later.
But I just think this is one of those things that happen, and I think it's unfortunate that we have to go to this legislation. I'm a little mystified looking at what the situation is here. Now, maybe it's something different than what I see on this game cam, but I mean, it's obvious to me that this is just a kind of a bird feeding situation, and deer wander in and maybe eat a few sunflower seeds, and I do note that I don't see many flowers in this situation here, so I just think that the benefit that we're getting from banning this is going to be minimal, and we're making some of our constituents unhappy.
One of the problems that we have is a number of us have bird feeders and have experienced the same thing that this gentleman has experienced. I have in my own home. My bird feeder is up in the air. The deer come in the wintertime. They'll come in to, you're either going to have to deal with my wife or this legislation. I guess that's probably the way it is because she loves feeding the deer. Representative Slezak.
Thank you. Can you give me some of the ideas if I have a bird feeder that's sitting 5 feet off the ground so deer won't come to it?
You know,
that won't disrupt any part of my property or anything else with nature? Anything.
Representative, what do you mean? It won't disrupt anything? I guess
like a fence or anything like that.
Okay, without having to put up something like that, one of the best suggestions I can give, that's what we do, is we limit the amount of feed we put out at a given time. We put out a little bit. We've got 2 feeders right now. We had 3. One got knocked down. I'm presuming probably by a bear here last year. But we put out limited number of feed at a time. We may go out 2 or 3 times a day. We love refreshing the bird feeders up. If you put a limited amount out, then the birds are going to eat that up. And even the stuff that's scattered on the ground, the seeds that are knocked out, the birds will keep that cleaned up. And again, I live in an area it's a yard. It's a yarding area. I live on the edge of a swamp, so I have a large concentration of deer from our area that actually live behind my house on 3 of my neighbors' properties. And it's work. I have deer that incidentally walk up every now and then, look, see if there's something there. But I have found that by limiting the amount that I put out, spreading it out amongst a couple different feeders, and a couple times a day going out, especially on the weekends, we love to sit in. I turn on my big screen TV as my 8-foot slider in the backyard, the sliding window, and we have squirrels and we have partridge and we have birds coming into it. But by limiting the amount that I put out is a very effective way of not having a large concentration of seeds, so that when the deer come up there, there's nothing for them. And over the course of the last couple of years, because of the ban, we've trained them, and I hardly see them come up out of the swamp hardly at all because they know there's not going to be feed there for them.